For the sake of peace, she married a human, and he unleashed power beyond belief in a distant galaxy where war had raged for centuries. Two powerful civilizations stood on the brink of total annihilation. The Valorex Empire, a race of fierce, technologically advanced warriors, and the Terran Alliance, a relatively young but determined human coalition, had fought countless battles, each one more devastating than the last. Millions of lives had been lost, and the hopes of peace seemed to fade with each passing day. The Valorex queen, Alia, was known throughout the galaxy as a ruler who would do anything to protect her people. She was a master strategist, her combat skills unmatched and her will unbreakable. But even she knew that the endless war could not go on forever. The cost of victory was becoming too great, and the people of Valorex were growing tired of the bloodshed. The war needed to end, and Alia was desperate to find a way. It was then that an idea as radical as it was daring emerged. For the sake of peace, Alia would marry a human. At first, the thought was unthinkable. The Valorex had always seen humans as weak, primitive beings, incapable of matching their power or intelligence. The Terran Alliance was a fledgling force. Its influence spread thin across the galaxy. But in the chaos of war, strange alliances were formed, and the possibility of peace was more important than ever. Alia, with the support of her advisors, decided that the only way to stop the bloodshed was to create a bond between their worlds, a bond that could not be broken by hatred or fear. Ethan Harper, a human diplomat, was chosen for this task. He was a man of calm, with the ability to speak to even the most hardened leaders. His reputation among humans was solid, though not without its own challenges. Ethan had spent years negotiating with alien species, trying to broker peace in a galaxy torn apart by war. His presence alone could bring hope to the most impossible situations, but he was no warrior. The thought of him marrying the Valorex queen seemed absurd to many, and there were whispers in the halls of power that his very presence in the Valorex court could be disastrous. But the human diplomat agreed, believing that peace was worth any sacrifice, even if it meant marrying the queen of a warlike people. His decision sent shockwaves throughout both the human and Valorex civilizations. For Alia, it was a choice she did not make lightly. She had spent her entire life fighting for her people, and now she was asked to marry a human. It was a decision that could bring her entire empire crashing down, but it was also the only way to avoid total destruction. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the entire Valorex court was filled with tension. The palace was decorated with banners that displayed the symbol of the peace treaty, two intertwined dragons, one representing the Valorex, the other the Terran Alliance. Alia stood before her people, regal in her ceremonial armor, her face a mask of determination. The dress she wore was nothing like the gowns humans wore. It was a battle attire, a mix of ceremonial armor and royal regalia, symbolizing her strength and leadership. Ethan stood beside her, wearing a simple but elegant suit that fit awkwardly with the grandeur of the Valorex court. He was tall for a human, but the difference between him and the towering Valorex made him seem small. His hands were clammy, his heart racing, but he stood firm, understanding the gravity of the moment. He was not just marrying a queen, he was marrying a people. The entire fate of the galaxy rested on this union. He knew the weight of the responsibility, but what terrified him more was the unknown. What would it mean to be married to someone like Alia? Would she respect him, or would he be seen as just another tool in a political game? Alia, too, was unsure of the future. She had seen many human diplomats, each one more skilled than the last, but none of them had ever demanded her attention the way Ethan did. There was something different about him, something that she couldn't place. Perhaps it was his calm demeanor or the way he seemed unaffected by the grandeur of the Valorex court. But it was more than that. There was a strength in him that, while not physical, was undeniable. The ceremony itself was simple by Valorex standards. There were no elaborate displays of magic or excessive rituals, just a quiet exchange of vows. Ethan promised to support Alia, to stand beside her in the fight for peace, and to protect her people as his own. Alia, in turn, pledged to safeguard the alliance between their worlds, to lead with wisdom and strength, and to honor the commitment they were making. As they exchanged vows, the weight of the moment settled heavily on both of them. This was no longer just a political marriage. It was a bond that could shape the future of the galaxy. It was a gamble. For Alia, the choice to marry a human could either save her people or destroy them. For Ethan, it was a chance to prove that humans could be more than the weak, helpless species the Valorex had always seen them as. But neither of them knew what lay ahead. They had no way of knowing that this marriage, this simple gesture of peace, would unlock powers neither of them had ever imagined. Powers that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to awaken. As the ceremony came to a close, the crowd erupted into applause. The union was sealed, and the first steps toward peace had been taken. But as Alia and Ethan turned to face the future, neither could have predicted how their worlds, and their very lives, would change. The weeks following the marriage were difficult for both Alia and Ethan. Though their union had been celebrated as a symbol of peace, the reality of their new lives together was anything but smooth. The Valorex court was filled with murmurs, and many of the warriors who had once followed Alia's command now questioned her decision. How could she marry a human, a species they had once considered beneath them? Alia, as strong as she was, could feel the weight of their doubts pressing against her every step. She was the queen, and her people expected her to lead them with power and wisdom. But the alliance with the humans, though necessary, was still fragile. The Valorex had never truly trusted the humans, and Alia knew that her marriage to Ethan would not change that overnight. Ethan, on the other hand, was struggling in his own way. He had been thrust into a world so different from his own. The Valorex palace, with its high walls, strange technology, and rich culture, overwhelmed him. The alien customs and rituals were foreign to him, and he often found himself lost in conversations he couldn't fully understand. The court was filled with beings who were far more powerful than him, and though his diplomatic skills had brought him to this point, he had no real experience in the kind of politics that ruled this galaxy. Despite the tension, the couple was forced to spend more time together. The peace treaty between their worlds depended on their unity, and they both understood that. Ethan was a diplomat, but his role had never been so personal before. Every decision he made, every word he spoke, seemed to carry the weight of the entire human race. And as he learned more about the Valorex, he began to understand just how much was at stake. Alia, too, had her own personal battles. As a queen, she had been trained from a young age to rule with strength and authority. But now she had to find a balance between her duty to her people and the strange bond she was forming with her new husband. She had never imagined that she would be in this position, yet here she was, bound by marriage to a human whose true significance she had yet to fully understand. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. Ethan had always been an ordinary man. He was strong, capable, and wise, but he had no special powers. At least, that's what he had always believed. One day, while they were in a private meeting discussing the ongoing negotiations for the peace treaty, something unexpected occurred. Alia had been speaking about the need for stronger defenses, but as she gestured toward a holographic map, Ethan's hand moved toward the console without thinking. To his surprise, the map flickered, shifting as if responding to his touch. "Did you do that?" Alia asked, her voice low, a mix of curiosity and concern. Ethan blinked, unsure of what had just happened. "No," he said, looking at the console. "I didn't touch it. I didn't even think I could." But Alia saw the subtle flicker in his eyes. She had known Ethan long enough to recognize the signs of something extraordinary. It wasn't just the map that had reacted. There was something in the air, a strange energy that seemed to emanate from Ethan himself. Over the next few days, Alia kept a closer watch on him. She noticed that small things began to change. Objects around him seemed to shift or vibrate without explanation. Once, a glass of water on the table near him had cracked in half, though he had barely touched it. Another time, a door that had been locked for years suddenly opened when Ethan walked past it. At first, Alia thought it might be a coincidence, but as more strange occurrences happened, she realized something was wrong. Ethan was somehow connected to the technology and energy that powered the Valorex Empire. And not just in a casual way. He was somehow manipulating it, even though he had no training in the ancient and complex systems the Valorex used. "What is happening to me?" Ethan asked Alia one evening as they sat in the palace gardens, the vast, dark sky above them filled with stars. Alia could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. He was no longer the calm diplomat she had met. He was a man on the edge of discovering something far beyond his control. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. But I think this is more than just you. It's your people, the humans. Me. But I'm just a normal guy, Ethan said, his voice rising in disbelief. Alia shook her head, her eyes focused on him. No, Ethan, there's something about you, something ancient, something in your blood. The Valorex believed that the humans had the potential for something more, but no one knew what that something was. Ethan turned his gaze toward the stars, feeling the weight of her words. He had heard stories from his ancestors about ancient powers hidden in the most unexpected places, but he had never imagined he would be part of that story. What does it mean? What am I supposed to do with this? Ethan's voice was filled with fear, but there was also an edge of curiosity. He had always been someone who believed in the power of knowledge, but this was beyond anything he could comprehend. Alia's eyes softened. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. I don't know yet, but we will figure it out together. She paused, then added, You must understand, Ethan. If your power is real, it could change everything, for better or for worse. The Valorex and the humans, all of us could be affected by what happens next. As the days passed, Alia began to investigate Ethan's newfound abilities, though she kept her findings to herself. The more she searched, the more she uncovered about an ancient prophecy. It spoke of a time when the Valorex and the humans would unite, and when that happened, a human with extraordinary power would rise. This human would be able to control the energy of the galaxy itself, but the prophecy also warned that such power was a double-edged sword. It could either bring peace or destruction. Alia couldn't help but wonder if Ethan was the human the prophecy had spoken of. Could he be the one who would wield the power to save the galaxy? Or would he be the one to destroy it? While she pondered these questions, the political situation became even more complicated. There were factions within the Valorex court who opposed the peace treaty with the humans. Some still believed that the Valorex were the superior species and that they should rule over all others, including the humans. They saw Alia's marriage to Ethan as a sign of weakness, an attempt to appease the humans rather than to conquer them. These factions grew bolder in their opposition, and whispers of rebellion began to spread through the ranks of the Valorex military. Alia could feel the tension mounting, but she also knew that the peace they had worked so hard to establish could not survive without Ethan's help. She turned to him one evening, the weight of their responsibilities heavier than ever. We have to trust each other, she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. We're in this together. Ethan nodded, though the fear in his eyes was still present. I don't know what's happening to me, Alia, but I'll do whatever it takes to help you, to help us. The journey ahead would not be easy, but in that moment, Alia and Ethan knew that they had no choice but to face the unknown together. The fate of their worlds, and perhaps the galaxy itself, depended on it. The situation between Ethan and Alia had reached a breaking point. The more Ethan's powers grew, the more unsettled the Valorex became. In the corridors of the palace, whispers echoed. Some feared that Ethan was not just a man but a weapon, a force that, once fully awakened, could destroy everything they had built. Others saw him as a savior, someone who could finally bring the peace that had been so elusive. But both groups were equally terrified of the unknown. For Ethan, the fear was becoming unbearable. Every day, it seemed, his powers were growing stronger, more unpredictable. At first, it had been small things. Objects moving without explanation, lights flickering when he entered a room, a slight hum in the air when he was near any technology. But now it was worse. One night, while trying to sleep in his quarters, he felt the entire bed vibrate beneath him. He could hear a low, resonant hum in the air, like something deep within the palace had awakened. It was his powers, surging again, this time beyond his control. Ethan had always been calm and collected, but now he was unsure of himself. He had never asked for this. He was just a diplomat, a man who had dedicated his life to bridging gaps between worlds. Now he was being forced into a role he didn't understand, one that could change the course of the galaxy. He had tried to push his powers down, tried to live as a simple man, but it was no use. Something in his blood was calling to him, urging him to embrace what he was becoming. Alia was watching all of this closely. She had been trained from a young age to be a leader, to handle the pressure of her people's expectations. But dealing with Ethan's transformation was something new, something she wasn't prepared for. She had seen warriors turn into legends, but she had never seen anything like this. Ethan was no longer just a human diplomat. He was something more. The question that haunted her was simple. What would he become? They had not spoken much in the last few days. Ethan had become withdrawn, spending most of his time in his quarters, trying to understand what was happening to him. Alia, too, was preoccupied with her duties. The pressure of the peace negotiations, the constant threats from the factions within the Valirex court, and the growing unrest among her people weighed heavily on her shoulders. She could feel the tension rising, and it was clear that the peace they had fought so hard to build was hanging by a thread. One evening, Alia went to find Ethan. She knew that if they were to have any chance of surviving the coming storm, they needed to come together to face this uncertainty as a team. When she reached his quarters, she knocked softly on the door, but there was no answer. She pushed it open and found him standing in front of a large window looking out at the stars. "Ethan," she said quietly, stepping into the room. He didn't turn around. "I'm not sure how much longer I can control this," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Every day it gets worse. I can feel the power inside me, and I don't know how to stop it." Alia approached him, her gaze steady. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "We will figure this out together." Ethan's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days he saw the calm determination in her expression. It was a comfort, even if it didn't take away the fear he felt inside. "I don't know if we can," he muttered. "I don't even know what's happening to me." "What if I become a danger to everyone around me?" Alia stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You won't. I won't let that happen." There was silence between them for a moment. The hum of the palace, the quiet energy that had become so familiar, seemed to echo around them. Alia could feel it, too, the subtle, growing power that pulsed through the air. She didn't understand it fully, but she knew one thing. Ethan's power was tied to something ancient, something that had been dormant for eons. "We need answers," Alia said, her voice low but firm. "We need to understand what's happening to you before it's too late." Ethan nodded, his eyes dark with uncertainty. "Where do we start?" "I have some knowledge," Alia replied. "There are old texts, ancient prophecies. The Valirex have always believed that humans had the potential for great power, but we didn't know what that meant until now. The stories speak of a time when a human would rise, one who could control the forces of the galaxy itself. But they also warn of the dangers of such power." The room was silent again as Ethan took in her words. The idea that he was somehow the key to the galaxy's future was overwhelming. He had always thought of himself as just a man, an ordinary diplomat doing his job. But now, he was the center of something far greater than himself. "Can you show me these texts?" Ethan asked after a long pause. Alia nodded. "I'll take you to the archives tomorrow, but be careful, Ethan. What you learn may change everything." The following day, Alia led Ethan to the Valirex archives. The building was ancient, its walls lined with records and texts that stretched back for millennia. There were scrolls that no one had read in centuries, and the air was thick with the weight of knowledge. As they walked deeper into the archives, Alia led him to a hidden chamber where the most important texts were kept. The scrolls were old, their surfaces worn with age, but they contained knowledge that no one in the galaxy had fully understood. They were the keys to the Valirex's past, their ancient history, and the prophecies that had been passed down through generations. Alia unrolled one of the scrolls and handed it to Ethan. As he read, his face grew more and more tense. The prophecy spoke of a human who would awaken to unimaginable power, a power that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. It was said that this human would be marked by a strange energy, one that could bend the laws of nature itself. And only the one who wielded this power could decide the galaxy's fate. "This is it," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "This is what I'm becoming." Alia looked at him, her expression serious. "We need to be careful. The factions in the Valirex court are already stirring. They won't accept your power, Ethan. They will see it as a threat." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him. He had always thought of himself as a simple man, but now he was something else. He was the human who could change everything. And that terrified him. As they left the archives, the air felt heavier. The tension was thick, and neither of them knew how much time they had left before things would spiral out of control. The factions within the Valirex were growing bolder, and the fragile peace they had worked so hard to establish was beginning to unravel. Ethan knew that he couldn't hide from his power any longer. The choice that lay ahead was a dangerous one. He could embrace what he was becoming, but it might come with consequences he couldn't predict. Or he could try to suppress it, risking everything he had fought for. But no matter what he decided, one thing was clear. The future of the galaxy depended on him. The air in the palace had grown tense, a feeling that clung to everything. Ethan could feel it in his bones, the growing unrest among the Valirex people, the pressure building against him. Every step he took, every word he spoke, seemed to echo with the weight of the galaxy's future. The more he tried to ignore his growing powers, the stronger they became. He could no longer deny it. The ancient prophecy that Alia had shown him was real. He was becoming the human with the power to change everything. The day after they had discovered the scrolls in the archives, things took a turn. A group of Valirex generals, leaders of the military factions that had long opposed the peace treaty, arrived at the palace. They had been silent for weeks, watching, waiting, but now their patience had worn thin. They were no longer content to sit back and watch the alliance between humans and Valirex unfold. The rumors of Ethan's growing powers had reached them, and they were determined to put a stop to it before it was too late. Alia had sensed it coming. She had known that the peace between their worlds was fragile, and she had feared that the factions who were against the human alliance would take action. The generals were powerful, their influence over the Valirex military vast. But Alia wasn't about to let them destroy everything she had worked for. As she walked into the grand hall where the meeting was to take place, Alia could feel the tension rise. Ethan stood by her side, his presence calming yet uncertain. He didn't know what to expect, but Alia could sense that he was ready for whatever came next. She had come to trust him more than anyone, even herself. Together, they had to face the threat that was now bearing down on them. The generals were already seated at the long, dark table when Alia and Ethan entered. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the palace's energy systems. The generals, all seasoned warriors, regarded Ethan with suspicion, their eyes narrowed. Some were still shocked that a human had been allowed to marry their queen. Others feared that Ethan's power would be the end of them all. Alia stepped forward, her voice steady but strong. "You've come to discuss the peace treaty, I assume." One of the generals, a tall Valirex warrior named Verk, stood up. His armor gleamed in the dim light, and his eyes burned with the intensity of his beliefs. "The peace treaty has failed, Alia," he said, his voice cold. "Your decision to marry this human has made us weak. We are losing our identity, and now, with the power that is rising in him, we are on the verge of losing everything." Ethan took a step forward, his eyes meeting Verk's. He had never been a warrior, but he had learned to stand his ground when the situation demanded it. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to help." Verk laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Help? You're nothing but a puppet. You may have power, human, but you will never understand the strength of the Valirex. We were built for war, not peace, and we will not bow to a human who thinks he can control us." Ethan felt a surge of something within him, a power that had been growing inside of him ever since that night in the archives. The air seemed to crackle around him, and the holographic maps on the table flickered as if responding to his energy. He held his breath, trying to control it, but it was becoming harder to keep the power in check. He didn't want to become what the Valirex feared, an uncontrollable force that could destroy them all. Alia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Enough, Verk," she said, her eyes burning with authority. "I will not allow anyone to threaten the peace we have worked so hard to build. If you want to challenge me, you will have to go through me." The generals exchanged uncertain glances. They had never seen Alia so fierce, so determined. Verk's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He had always respected Alia as a warrior and a leader, but this was different. This was something he could not understand. "We are not afraid of you, Alia," Verk said, his voice low. "But we are afraid of what that human will become, and if you continue to stand by him, we will have no choice but to take action." The room fell silent. Alia could feel the pressure mounting, and she knew that the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. These generals were not like the diplomats she had worked with. They were warriors, and they would not hesitate to use force to get what they wanted. Ethan turned to her, his face filled with concern. "What will we do, Alia? I can't control this power." "I don't even know what it is." Alia's gaze softened as she looked at him. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. We'll find a way together, but we need to be ready. The battle we face now is not just one of strength, it's one of will." The generals were not finished yet. They continued to argue, their voices rising in anger. But Alia knew that this was just the beginning. If she didn't act soon, the entire peace treaty could fall apart, and the Valorex would be plunged back into the chaos of war. Ethan could feel the growing tension in the room, the weight of their eyes on him. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was just a diplomat, a man who believed in peace. But now it seemed that peace was slipping away, and he was caught in the middle of a battle he didn't fully understand. As the argument continued, Ethan's powers surged again, this time more intensely than before. He could feel the energy inside him, the power that was now beyond his control. It was as though something was pulling at him, urging him to unleash it. But he held back, knowing that if he gave in, he might destroy everything. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when Verk's voice rang out. "We will not allow a human to rule us. If you choose him over your own people, we will have no choice but to act." Before anyone could react, a blinding flash of light filled the room. Ethan's eyes widened as the energy around him erupted, surging through the room in waves. The table shook and the walls trembled as though they were about to collapse. The generals stood frozen, their eyes wide in shock. Ethan was no longer in control. The power had taken over and he could feel it coursing through him like wildfire. The holographic maps flickered wildly and the air hummed with an intensity that made it impossible to breathe. Alia stepped forward, her voice steady but urgent. "Ethan, control it. You must control it." But Ethan could barely hear her over the roar of the energy that surrounded him. The power was overwhelming, a force he couldn't understand. He had to stop it, but the more he tried to hold back, the stronger it became. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The generals, Alia, the palace, it all stood still as Ethan faced the full extent of the power within him. The future of the galaxy and of his marriage to Alia rested on his shoulders. Could he control it? Or would the power consume him? And with it, the fragile peace that had been born from his union with the Queen. Ethan stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the swirling energy that seemed to pulse from every corner. The power inside him had erupted, uncontrolled, filling the air with a pressure so intense that it made it hard to breathe. His heart raced in his chest, and his mind was spinning. He had never felt anything like this before. The Valorex generals stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Alia, standing a few feet away, her expression a mixture of worry and determination, watched him closely. She could feel the power, too, felt it in the air around her, in the very ground beneath her feet. She had seen warriors rise to greatness, but this was different. This wasn't just power, it was something ancient, something that could either save them or destroy them. "Ethan," Alia's voice broke through the chaos, strong but steady. "You have to control it, you must." He couldn't even hear her properly. The energy around him was too overwhelming, too intense. The room around him flickered, and for a moment it seemed like the walls themselves were bending, the very fabric of space shaking under the force of his power. He had to focus. He had to stop it before it consumed everything. But how? He had always been just a diplomat. He wasn't supposed to be a force of nature, something that could shake entire civilizations. His entire life had been about negotiation, about finding common ground. But now it felt like everything he had ever known was slipping away. The power was taking over and he had no idea how to stop it. For a moment it seemed like he might lose himself. But then something inside him shifted. A flicker of clarity, a whisper of thought, and the connection to Alia's voice reached him. Focus. He wasn't alone. He wasn't just the man in this moment, he was part of something much bigger. He looked at Alia, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time since all of this had started, he felt a calmness spread over him. She was there. She had always been there, standing by his side, supporting him. And he realized in that moment that the power inside him was not just his own to control. It was theirs to control, together. He breathed in deeply, closing his eyes. The energy still buzzed around him, still felt like it was tearing at the edges of his mind. But he focused. He focused on Alia's presence, on her strength, on the bond they had formed. The power was part of him, but it was also part of everything, the galaxy, the universe. He wasn't meant to fight it. He was meant to harness it, to connect with it. It wasn't about control, it was about balance. Slowly, the energy in the room began to calm. The intense pressure that had been crushing the air started to subside. The walls stopped shaking and the flickering lights steadied. Ethan opened his eyes, and the room, though still charged with an unusual tension, felt calmer. He could feel the power within him, but now it wasn't overwhelming, it was present. like a force he could move with, not fight against. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Alia stepped forward cautiously, her eyes searching his face. "You did it," she said softly. "You controlled it." Ethan looked at her, his breath still shallow. "I think I did, but I don't know what comes next." Alia nodded, her gaze never leaving him. "We'll face it together." All of it. The Valirex generals were still standing in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the two of them. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then Verk, the general who had spoken out against Ethan the most, finally broke the silence. What is this?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and fear. Ethan's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time he felt no fear, no uncertainty. The power inside him was real, and it was part of who he was now, but it didn't define him. His choices, his actions, those were what mattered. "This," Ethan said, his voice steady, "is the future of humans and Valirex. I won't let it be something that tears us apart, but it's up to all of us together to shape what comes next." Alia turned to the generals, her voice commanding. "This power is not a threat, it's a tool. We've been given a chance to build something better, something greater than the war we've fought for so long. But it's a choice we all have to make, and it starts now." For a long time there was no response. The generals seemed to hesitate, their faces conflicted. But finally Verk spoke again, his voice quieter, less certain. "You speak of peace, but the Valirex have always ruled by strength. What makes you think we can change?" Alia's eyes locked with his, and for a moment there was only the silent weight of their shared history. She had led her people through countless battles, through wars that had cost more than they could count. But the price of victory had always been too high. She knew that now. "What makes us think we can change?" she asked softly. "The same thing that makes us think we can fail, Verk. The same thing that makes us human, makes us Valirex. Hope. We can change because we must." The room fell silent once more. Ethan could feel the tension still hanging in the air, but now there was something else, a flicker of possibility. For the first time, it felt like they were all on the same side, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. Verk stepped forward, his eyes meeting Alia's. "You're right, Queen Alia, perhaps there is hope, but the road ahead will not be easy, not for you, not for me, and not for any of us." Alia nodded. "I know, but we walk that road together or we walk it alone, and I won't walk it alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt the weight of the galaxy lift, even if just a little. The struggle wasn't over. The path ahead was uncertain, and there would be more challenges, more battles to face. But something had shifted, something deep and unspoken. The bond between him and Alia was no longer just a political tool, it was a partnership, and together they could face anything. Ethan turned to her, his voice quieter now, but filled with certainty. "I'll stand by you, Alia, always." Alia smiled at him, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. It was a small thing, but to Ethan it meant everything. "We'll build this together," she said softly. The generals watched the exchange, and though they remained silent, the weight of the moment wasn't lost on them. They had seen something today, something they hadn't expected. Maybe it was a new kind of strength. Maybe it was a new way forward. As the room began to settle, and the echoes of Ethan's power slowly faded, Alia and Ethan stood side by side, knowing that they had just taken the first real step toward a new future. It was a future built not on war or fear, but on hope, trust, and the belief that change was possible. The galaxy was vast, and the road ahead was long. But for the first time, they were no longer walking it alone.